Sarah's asked if Trump incites violence against reporters. Her response is legendary. Isn't it just great watching mainstream media's so-called reporters whining about how people aren't falling for their lies anymore? Today at their daily press briefing, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders had to once again swiftly shut down a reporter who insanely alleged that President Donald Trump's supporters were actually menacing journalists at Tuesday night's Make America Great Again rally. The Daily Caller reported. Does the president encourage the support of people who showed up last night in these QAnon and Blacks for Trump fringe groups? And secondly, is the White House willing to say right now, in view of what happened with one of our TV colleagues last night, that it is wrong for his most vocal supporters to be menacing toward journalists doing their jobs? David Martosco asked during Wednesday's press briefing. Martosco, a former executive editor for the Daily Caller, was referring to Trump supporters chanting "CNN sucks" at CNN's chief White House correspondent Jim Acosta at the rally. Sanders replied that Trump denounces violence against reporters and supports a free press. However, he also views the press as having a responsibility to report things accurately. Martosco admitted that no one was violent toward Acosta, but that supporters were trying to prevent a broadcaster from getting his broadcast out and yelling that his network sucks. Is that right or wrong? We support freedom of the press, but we also support freedom of speech, and we think those things go hand in hand, Sanders shot back. The media was allowed to get away with anything they lied about during the Bush and Obama administrations. They spent the 8 years of the W administration attacking him left and right, and he would never defend himself. Then these same journalist hacks spent the next 8 years under Obama not telling the entire truth in order to make him look bad. As an example, not many reported that in 2014 the Obama administration was putting illegal alien children in cages, while at the same time they picked up pictures from those days and reported that they were from 2018. And not to mention the Time magazine cover, which they had to apologize for after they decided it would be a good idea to take a crying little girl and Photoshop her to make her look like she was being detained by the president himself. What the media is really upset at is that they just can't seem to understand how a person, an outsider, like Donald Trump was actually able to wake so many of us up. The truth is, Trump didn't wake all of us. Some of us were already wide awake as we saw the hatchet job they did on the George W. Bush presidency and how they took what could have been the cleanest presidential candidate ever in Mitt Romney and turned him into a monster who bullied a kid when he was in high school. Yup, mainstream media, the gig is up. Here are a few examples of blatant media bias via The Washington Post. 1. CNN asks the Democratic National Committee about what questions to ask Mr. Trump in an interview. The DNC colluded with CNN in devising questions in April to be asked of Mr. Trump in an upcoming Wolf Blitzer interview. A DNC official with the email username Dylan let DNC.org ask for ideas for an interview by Mr. Blitzer. Wolf Blitzer is interviewing Trump on Tuesday ahead of his foreign policy address on Wednesday. Please send me thoughts by 10:30 a.m. tomorrow, the email, released by WikiLeaks, read. A separate email from the DNC requested that CNN was looking for questions for then GOP primary candidates Texas Senator Ted Cruz and maybe a couple on former Hewlett-Packard CEO Carly Fiorina. Upon the news, The Washington Post ran a blog reading, and now from WikiLeaks, a CNN non-scandal, saying the entire thing was a nothing burger because CNN has similar communications with Republicans, without producing any evidence. 2. John Podesta says dump all those emails. Washington Post immediately looks to interpret comments positively. A hacked email on March 2, 2015, sent at the same time the New York Times broke a story titled, Hillary Clinton used personal email at State Department, possibly breaking rules, said Mrs. Clinton's campaign chairman. Mr. Podesta recommended dumping her emails. On another matter, and not to sound like Lenny, but we are going to have to dump all those emails. The right-leaning press took this to mean deleting the emails, which her team later erased 33,000, but the mainstream media was there to get Mrs. Clinton's back, interpreting dump to mean make public. The Post ran the headline, "Why dump all those emails doesn't mean what Drudge thinks it does." But from context, it's clear that Podesta was talking about whether to make the emails public, not to delete them, the Post wrote. His usage of dump resembled the typical DC usage of Friday news dump, a release of troves of documents that dares reporters to spend precious weekend hedonism time hunting through them. And that was their evidence to the contrary, not as though dump could possibly have two meanings. 3. CNBC's John Harwood. One of the early WikiLeaks emails shows Mr. Harwood advising Mr. Podesta, and then gloating over the question he asked Mr. Trump, running a comic book version of a presidential campaign, during the Republican primary debate he moderated. Mr. Harwood titled the email "I Imagine," and continued the sentence in the body of the email, writing that Obama feels some sad vindication at this demonstration of his years-long point about the opposition party veering off the rails. He added, "I certainly am feeling that way with respect to how I questioned Trump at our debate.